Welcome everybody. We are going to make a start now on the second day of our Singapore-IEA regional training program on low carbon buildings. So yesterday we had interesting conversations on advanced energy efficiency and zero carbon buildings by design. So we talked about aspects like planning and building codes, and some of the on the whole, some of the longer term things that we need to do to decarbonize our buildings. Today, we're going to focus on smart, clean and energy efficient building systems and operations. So we're going to move into what we do within our buildings. We're going to be talking a bit more about behavior. And also we're going to be talking about some of the things that we can perhaps do more quickly. So what can we do in the here and now? This is in the background of seeing, unfortunately, a slowdown in energy efficiency progress globally. So we very much need to scale up and speed up at the same time. So we'd like that to be the mantra for today and for our conversations today. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Ian Hamilton, who's going to give us our opening presentation. Ian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mel. And thank you everybody for joining again today. And I'll be happy to give a introduction to the different issues or in terms of the smart, clean and energy efficient building systems operations. And then we'll have a panel session, which will be moderated by Mel, which will include this great list of speakers: Anna Kane, Yenny Indra, Clayton Miller, Stanley Ning, Dirk Schweid, and Bintang Widhana. And we're very pleased to have you on board for this. So in the first instance, I'd like to speak a little bit about the topic area that we have today, which is buildings, systems, and operations. And what do we mean when we're covering this? Because yesterday, as we spoke about the efficient design aspects, being able to pay attention to solar orientation or the way in which a city is laid out to ensure that efficiency can be a part of what the building and planning process is, and being able to make use of passive design approaches to ensure that efficiency is achieved through sufficiency being offered. In other words, what is needed within the building can be taken care of through design as much as possible before then moving to the operations and the efficient systems being installed. And the idea behind today really is to talk about what proper operation and management activities could and should be, and in particular to think about those that are continued emerging trends within the region. Energy efficiency through better indoor environmental quality and equipment reliability. These are going to have major benefits to the productivity of occupants and a longer lifetime of the building and its components, reducing costs and the like. And operation management plans typically will focus on those types of activities, but have to include the user or the operator as a part of that. So what teamwork and management systems will be put in place to ensure that that building can be maintained and run well and efficiently. When we're looking at what we can do going forward, and this is really important, yesterday we covered energy efficient designs as a way of delivering this and the policies and approaches at that building and urban scale, and also many of the multiple benefits that these approaches can yield. And we're really also looking at what it is that the systems and building system technologies can offer. The good news is that so many of what we need to be using and installing exist today. And you can see on this right-hand side that 3/4 are already in that mature or early adoption stages. In other words, we're not searching around for something that isn't yet there. We have what's available. And on the left-hand side, we can see that the major cumulative greenhouse gas mitigation opportunities of buildings, in particular, if you look at, for example, in cooling, the technology performance of offering of technologies that exist today and are in those early adoption stages are really considerable. Electrification and commercial heat can reduce their CO2 emissions. And for cooling, as I said, the improvements can be a major part of the mitigation actions out to 2070 among buildings. And where the technology gaps are, I mean, we spoke a little bit yesterday, certainly in our plenary, about that, the process of design and the between architects and designers and planners about how best to ensure that buildings are designed with efficiency. And in terms of those technologies that building operations and systems might be considering, we look across the major end uses. So cooking and water, space cooling, ventilation, appliances, lighting in residential buildings, and the opportunities for more efficient heat pumps or passive solar opportunities through solar thermal, and being able to make use of properly sized systems and smart systems that aren't operating all the time. They're more sensitive to conditions and user requirements. These are really key towards improving that residential system operations side. They don't have we are the building operation manager of our home, and we have to think about being able to adapt into what it is that we anticipate. So on the non-residential side, there's a much bigger scale to be able to look at, central HVAC, heat pumps, etc. And the opportunity there of using more district level systems as well among users in locations. So whether that's logistics and cooling in a district is very important. And then being able to think through, the future of certain types of uses that are growing among non-residential, data centers and cold store, really key here. And the adoption of digital systems here in terms of building management, again, like residential, but having to account for a much more complicated building structure. So the opportunities are considerable. And if we were to look at one area of cooling in particular here, the stock of air conditioning units in Southeast Asia will expect to grow and reach almost 300 million units in 2040, compared with the 40 million units in 2007 shown here. Indonesia may account for more than half this growth, but the expectations are across the region that air conditioning ownership is going to increase such that nearly 60% of households by 2040 could on average have air conditionings and 2 per household. So it's really, really key technology area that I know that so many of you will be working on and interested in. And the efficiency opportunities are really considerable with cooling. When we look at the drivers of demand growth across Southeast Asia, it's not only air conditioning, of course. It's going to be looking at large appliances. So the ownership of white goods in particular is important. Many households having the opportunity to increase the availability of appliances and technologies in their home. This is certainly no bad thing, and we want to ensure that those are well connected into not only more efficient uses in terms of their ability to connect to the grid, in terms of the ability to communicate with each other and with the user through smart systems. It's really opportunity there as well. And then lighting being another major area of improvement, and the use of LEDs in so many units now. Really, the LED story is such a success, and that continues to be the case going forward. But it's really important that for things like lighting, that the standards of performance for those devices are continued to maintain and be of a high quality. I wanted to very briefly outline to you the Asia Roadmap, which I mentioned yesterday. And in the same way that urban design and new and existing buildings are considered in terms of their design aspects, building systems and operations are as well. And it's important for us to think through the different targets and criteria that could be achieved over this time for Asia. And this roadmap, which we mentioned here, sets those targets out and really relies on inputs from so many across the region as to what do they expect or is needed to achieve this long-term goal of net zero. And one in particular that I thought I would mention is benchmarking. As a policy that is focused on building systems and operations, the benchmarking is a really key tool towards that, because it allows us to both know how the performance standards are in use. And so here at the present, there may be a voluntary benchmarking program, but going forward, it's really important for buildings, particularly large commercial users, for example, but then also over time that all buildings have really well-structured benchmarks that can be used to help ratchet up performance levels, and in other being used in different ways for example, for certification and disclosure. And to give this example, when looking at cooling technologies, benchmarks offer an ability for us to see the range of performance that might be available in a particular market. And what this figure is showing is looking across a number of different markets, including countries across ASEAN, that the minimum available technologies, for example, for air conditioning, as compared to the average efficiency. And then you see these gray bars, which is they're typically available, and they're very wide. I mean, these are really important for us to begin to continue that shift towards the right-hand side, that on average, the energy efficiency of ACs need to reach 6 watts per watts seasonal energy efficiency ratio to meet that sustainable development scenario, those efficient technology scenarios. And lastly, to just say, in terms of the way in which one might address these, is looking across that policy sphere for systems and operation of these different technologies. So regulations, really important push towards efficiency within the market, looking at those minimum energy performance standards and codes like we talked yesterday. And then that information angle, which is informing users, informing consumers and customers going forward, being able to inform through disclosure and audit programs, really key here as well, that pulls the market towards that outcome. And then incentives as well, for those laggards or those who require additional support to achieve this, whether it's rebates or loans or bulk procurement, are really instrumental towards achieving more efficient adoption of technologies that have a greater performance. And so very lastly, I'd like to just take this opportunity to ask for your assistance in what we're doing over the coming month, which is continuing to work on the Asean Roadmap for sustainable buildings and construction, as well as cooling, and to highlight that in terms of inputs, we are building on the Asia Roadmap, and which I'll come to in just a moment. But the idea being able to say, what is the current baseline of performance, the growth, the rates, the trends. We want to know and draw from your expertise to see where we are today. And the purpose of the roadmap is to set a common vision. We have this ambition of zero carbon buildings, by when within the region and where, how is it that we can achieve that outcome? And then the focus is that the ASEAN Roadmap is going to build those strategies and actions, where the Asia Roadmap, which is a regional setting targets and timelines, this one is very much about that list of ingredients coming together. How do we do this? And so very briefly to say that the opportunity is that we are asking for your assistance here to help inform that process. And being able to share great examples is one of those ways, and inputting into the actual development of the roadmap through feedback. And just to mention briefly the way it works, we have these 7 thematic areas, of which today systems and operations is our topic area. But each one has a vision, a set of strategies, and some milestones around those action areas, and to share also the best practice case studies. What does that look like? Well, here is a very high-level overview. We're not expecting you to read this. These can be made available, but each one has those components that we target. For example, knowing whom are responsible for helping to improve that coordination, seeing that governments can lead by example in materials and systems and operations. So we're trying to be both comprehensive and provide the users and the developers of the roadmaps these different elements together. So looking at our strategies, the current status, and by when should these actions come together, and being able to target those towards showcasing best practice as well, so that they seem kind of real in the region. So you can be a part of this process. We'll share this information following, but to ask for your assistance, we have a website that describes the overall roadmap development process in more detail, and we have a survey for input. And then for the examples that you might bring forward today, if there's some that you would like to suggest to us, then that would be really appreciated. And on that note, I will sum up and look towards also handing back over to Mel. Just before I do, I wanted to quickly mention again the training coursework, where we have yesterday provided a template for those of you who have already gone a ways to developing that. We're looking towards you to share in the breakout session. So when you enter the breakout session, if you might just put in the chat that you have an example to share, then the facilitator will call on you towards the end. And on that, thank you very much, and over to Mel.
Thank you very much, Ian. And hopefully for everybody who's joining us today, that provides the context for the rest of this discussion. And as Ian said, we really want to focus on making the most of what we know is already available. So really focusing on the here and now. And we have this critical 10 years where we need to really exploit all energy efficiency potential. We're not waiting for a silver bullet. We have many of the solutions that we need available to us now. So for the framing of this conversation, we'd like to very much concentrate on what we can do in the immediate term. So for our panel now, what we're going to do is I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and, given the context that Ian's just provided, say a few words about what they do and their organisation in that particular context. And I'm going to turn first to Anna Kane. Anna works at the very start of providing modern energy services to communities who perhaps haven't had them or certainly haven't had adequate services. Anna, would you like to make your introduction, please?
Thanks, Mel, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here as part of this training. I thought I'd just reflect a little bit on sort of the context that I see for this low carbon buildings, but I also want to recognise the importance of thinking about that first access as well. So in the sort of the global building space, so I'm doing research at the Australian National University and also provide some support to Energy Lab Cambodia. Energy Lab Cambodia supports clean energy startups in that space and also does some support of advocacy in the policy space as well to support clean energy, the opportunity of clean energy that Cambodia has. It's great to see a number of Cambodians in this training. For Cambodia, there's a really exciting opportunity to engage in clean energy and in energy efficiency. There are global drivers to trying to decarbonize energy consumption and manufacturing supply chains, and things like science-based targets and the RE100s, renewable energy 100s, really motivating companies to want to have access to clean energy and also energy efficiency within their operations through their global supply chains. And there's a real thirst of the private sector in Cambodia to engage in these opportunities, not just for those global drivers, but because it also means that their business costs go down. So things like rooftop solar and the energy service model means that companies can break up their manufacturing or their operations and allow specialist companies to come in and optimize those parts of their business. So it results in a clean energy or clean outcome, but it also results in energy of reduced business costs, and that's a huge driver. I'd also like to reflect on the idea of technology. And in the preamble, there was a lot of discussion about new and emerging technologies, which is really exciting. It sort of goes into our understanding of what's possible. I'd also just reflect on, particularly in buildings, and they're spaces for people, and the way that people feel in a building will be impacted by the environment that we create. And so the technologies that we generate or come up with for buildings need to be, ideally would be very reflective of the needs of those people that occupy those buildings. So I would probably reflect on or point to sort of human-centered approaches or participatory design approaches to supporting some really interesting innovation to decarbonize buildings and also ensure that they're a good and productive place for people to be. I'll end my opening remarks there.
Thanks very much, Anna, and thanks for reminding us that we talk a lot about technology, but I like, spaces for people is something we really need to remember, and we'll come back to that, I'm sure, with other presenters. Jenny, may I ask you to go next, please, and to introduce yourself in this context, and compliment you on your background as well. I'm really appreciating all the greenery that I have in front of me today. I've got a grey, wet Paris sky out of the window, and this is just fantastic.
Yeah, this is actually one of the official GBPN background, that everything would be green and it would look like in our eyes. So thank you for having me here. Hi everyone, I'm Yeni, I'm from GBPN. So a little bit context for our work in GBPN. So GBPN has a global institution work on international collaboration with all stakeholders. Like already mentioned by Anna, it is important to engage with the specific skill holder and also aware of the people and the market that we are relating in this process. So what we do in Indonesia was more on the push factor, the key push factor that Ian already mentioned, the regulation. So GBPN works nicely and now it's growing up on providing support for the policy reform. So we're providing support for the policy reform for the local government to develop an evidence-based recommendation and requirement to support the government to implement sustainable decarbonization policy. So this is the area where we help the government to find out what are the things that's implementable and not implementable to support the clean energy and energy efficiency implementation at the cities level. So the thing that we also support to develop a platform that enable all level of institution and also stakeholders to combine their information, also to identify the possible opportunity on what are the things that doable in the next point or in the long term. So those are the things that we are doing with GBPN in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. But perhaps next we could go to Clayton, please.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Mel. And thanks, Ian, for setting the context today. My name is Dr. Clayton Miller. I'm an assistant professor at the National University of Singapore in the Department of the Built Environment. And my research team is called the Building and Urban Data Science Lab. We as a team have a kind of a mix of architects, engineers, but also computer scientists and data scientists that are looking at ways to process all the data that's being generated by all of these systems. And Ian said a really interesting context in the sense of the growth of systems and air conditioning and things like that in Southeast Asia. Alongside that growth of devices and equipment is a growth of the need to address problems and fix things and kind of maintain things. And there's a lot of data. There's also a huge growth in the amount of sensor data and building management system data, things like that, alongside that. And so my team, we focus a lot on research that helps the whole community move forward in terms of data science techniques to process these data in a very scalable way. In the building industry, we have a huge challenge in that every building is different. We're kind of we're not like smartphones and computers where we can sort of fix everything with one patch kind of thing. It's like every building is very different from each other. So there's a lot of need for people to do that type of energy analysis. And so we're looking at ways to improve machine learning techniques. So we have, for example, in the last couple of years, we hosted we helped host a machine learning competition called the Great Energy Predictor 3 competition. I can put a link in the chat later if you're interested. That was really kind of a crowdsourced method of finding the best way to predict energy using in buildings using machine learning. And more importantly, it was an exercise in creating lots of examples of energy analysis using very common, like using the most common data science language, Python and R. And so I'll put the link there so you can see there's a lot of really interesting things there. And then in addition, a lot of the teaching that my team does is focused on teaching basic data science skills specific to the built environment context. So we also have an edX course, which you can check out, which is free, which will be relaunching here in a few weeks in mid-August, which is called Data Science for Construction, Architecture, and Engineering. So it's a context-specific application of data science tools. Other things that we do here in Singapore are related to energy research collaborations with companies like Johnson Controls. And we're part of some of the research that's being done at the Open Blue Lab here in Singapore at NUS. And various other applications of research related to thermal comfort and occupant satisfaction in buildings as well. So I'll put a few links in the chat for people that are interested in following up on these directions, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion.
Thank you very much, Clayton. And next, so I mean, and for bringing up the data and the digitalization end of things, it's really important to us, and we're going to go on and speak a bit more about that, I think, across this session. So, and on that very point, let's go to Stanley next, if we may.
Great, thank you. And I just had a couple of slides to introduce my work in the organization. I'll share that now. So New Energy Nexus, we're a global organization, an international nonprofit, and our main mission is to support energy startups of all types, and energy efficiency for the built environment is a main pillar of this. So these are our sort of offices around the world, specifically in Southeast Asia. We're in Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, and have an office in Singapore as well. And we run different types of programming, business trainings, like accelerators for entrepreneurs that want to get into the space. So a lot of times it could be researchers at university working on gathering data and like data analytics, but how do you actually then commercialize that is the type of support that we would give them to try to come up with the business model, come up with initial engagement model with different commercial buildings, industrial zones, and stuff like that. We focus on everything from clean energy, energy efficiency, obviously energy management platforms and IoT collecting data is a big part of the energy efficiency picture. So that's sort of a core pillar of our work. Just to highlight one of the programs we're running in New York, it's with NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research Development Authority, and we're running a pilot fund to fund energy efficiency projects, primarily with energy efficiency startups using these IoT and data analytics technologies, working with mid-sized buildings, because we realized that a lot of the larger skyscrapers, they have their full BMS system, they have their full budgets for this kind of energy efficiency work. But a lot of the mid-sized buildings and smaller buildings are really left behind and there's a lot of room for work in that area. More specific to ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, we ran the Building Energy Challenge last year with ADB Ventures. And that was really focusing on low-cost cooling, right? Like, as Ian mentioned, one of the largest areas of opportunity for the C&I space in ASEAN is really this HVAC chiller optimization, which uses like up to 70% of the building's load, right? Energy management platforms, collecting the data, as Clayton mentioned, and also facade and smart building solutions. So those were the focus areas. So this is really getting a large, on board some of the largest users of energy, some large companies across Southeast Asia. We have food manufacturing, we had hospital groups, we have hotel groups, and really getting them to engage with these top-notch global energy efficiency companies and doing the business B2B matchmaking and trying to get these pilots off the ground and talking them through further deployment plans as well. So just an example of all the different companies we've supported in the building space. So they come from all over the world, and yeah, looking forward to the discussion later on. So.
Many thanks, Stanley. Again, it's a fascinating business model you have there, and we're very interested to talk about some specific examples as we go on. Dirk, would you like to go next, please?
Yes, thank you, Mel. Good morning or good hello to everyone around the world. My name is Dirk. I'm talking to you from Stuttgart University. I'm here research group leader for system integration and sustainable building at the institute, which deals with energy systems in buildings, but also sustainable building, building physics, and all these issues. I have received my training in Germany, of course, and I went to Australia to do my PhD. And after that, I was working for some time in China with my consulting firm. I was involved in the introduction of passive house concepts of DG&B certification schemes. So many new technologies in this market. And when you look at China today, it's quite advanced, and there's a lot which happened before. Today, I'm working here at the university at several research projects in Vietnam and also in Cambodia. One is the project Kamasek, which deals with material research in its core. But in this project, we are also looking at how people live in buildings. We do measurement in buildings. We just finished a large measurement campaign in residential high-rise buildings in Hanoi, and we will continue to do the same in Ho Chi Minh City, and then also we'll do it in Phnom Penh in Cambodia, where we measure the indoor climate and try to find out how people live and how they use air conditioning. One of the findings is that air conditioning is at the moment used very carefully, and people are very aware of energy costs and so on, but that of course that there is a lot of development happening, and that we can expect that not only the installation numbers will rise, but also the use patterns of cooling technology. And this is visible in our data. We use our data to prepare data sets for building simulation studies to support designers, architects, engineers to do specialized analysis of buildings based on measurements of real buildings. And this is, I think, a very important service for the construction industry, so that in future energy efficiently can be built. We have another project, Rebumat, which deals with resource efficient building materials. There we really look at recycling of building materials, bio-based materials, and also design for recycling. We work together with the Vietnamese colleagues and realize that there is a lot of knowledge and a lot of research in this field, not only in Vietnam, but also in the region. So we get in contact with many people here. We have the Build for People project. I think Michael reported about it yesterday as well. This is in Cambodia, where we have a very people-centered approach. We talk about quality of life from different dimensions. And from my part, I connect this topic to sustainable buildings. So how do people live in buildings, and how does this affect their building operation, their need for conditioning, for cooling, for energy use in buildings, but also how buildings are built. And this is also interesting result that we have to see that the design of buildings need to be locally adapted, that we have to understand how the people live at the moment in order to design the right buildings and to supply the right equipment. I heard a lot of interesting keywords in the introduction of the other speakers, and I'm looking very forward to our discussion today. So I say hello to everyone and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And could we go to Bintang now, please?
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity, Ms. Mel. Did you hear my voice clearly? I think you seem like trouble. Okay.
A little quiet, but yes.
Okay, maybe I use my speaker a bit near me. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. Thank you all for joining for today's meeting of the agenda. So my name is Bintang. I am the Renewable Energy, Sustainable Energy, Energy Efficiency Analyst from the ASEAN Center for Energy. ASEAN Center for Energy is the intergovernmental organization in the ASEAN to manage the effort of the energy in the ASEAN. ASEAN itself is a region that has a optimistic economic growth that will rebound or achieve even higher growth if ASEAN addresses at the regional and national level. However, to fuel this growth, the ASEAN needs a big amount of the energy needed. That's for identified in the ASEAN Energy Outlook. That is one of the key deliverables from the ASEAN Center for Energy. And then through the APIC, there is another key deliverable of the ASEAN Center for Energy, the APIC, or we call it the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation. We are trying to enhancing energy connectivity and market integration in the ASEAN to achieve the energy security, accessibility, affordability, and sustainability for all. And for the phase 2, now currently for 2021, the sub-team was added that accelerating energy transition and strengthening energy resilience through greater innovation and cooperation. The APIC itself has 7 program area. That is the ASEAN Power Grid, that is to expand regional multilateral electricity trading, strengthen grid resilience, and modernization and promote clean and renewable energy integration. Next is the Asean Gas Pipeline, that is to pursue the development of a common gas market for ASEAN by enhancing gas and LNG connectivity and accessibility. And then the coal and clean coal technology, that is to optimize the role of clean coal technology in facilitating the transition towards sustainable and lower emission development. Next is the energy efficiency and conservation. We have a target of reduced energy intensity by 32% in 2025 based on the 2005 levels, and encourage further energy efficiency and conservation effort, especially in transport and industrial sector. Next, in the renewable energy, we want to achieve an aspirational target for increasing the component of renewable energy to 23% by 2025 in the ASEAN energy mix. This including through increasing the share of RE in installed power capacity to 35% by 2025. Also, the regional energy policy and planning, it is to advance the energy policy and planning to accelerate the region's energy transition and resilience. Lastly is the civilian nuclear energy, that is to build a human resource capability on nuclear science and technology for power generation. In addition, in the energy efficient conservation, I myself is in the project of the harmonization, promotion of higher efficiency air conditioner in ASEAN through harmonization of standard and strengthening of market verification and enforcement capability. So we want to accelerate the deployment of higher efficient air conditioner in ASEAN member states through the removal of non-tariff barrier to trade and active policy support to the ASEAN member state. The market transformation itself, we want to have a favor of higher efficiency air conditioner that will directly reduce the electricity consumption and greenhouse gas emission from the residential and commercial sector in the ASEAN. And currently we have tried to harmonize the testing and evaluation methods in the ASEAN member state, and also to having a capacity building for testing infrastructure. For our next step, we want to have a detailed market analysis so we can have a strategy to have a push economic side that is from the consumer side. So the local manufacturer will have a better capability and to provide to the ASEAN market. I'm looking forward to today's discussion, and that is all from me. Back to you, Mel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bintang, and thank you, of course, to all the support that we have from ACE on this on the roadmap project in particular. So, in the context of what we do in the here and now, the fact that we need to do more, we need to do it faster. I wonder if I could ask you to think of your favourite example that you've come across, be it in the region or you think that's applicable to the region, that you think if there was a real focus on this particular thing, whatever you want to pose, what would it do for us? And if you could, give a little bit of detail about why and what evidence there is, figures if you have them, but just think about the golden opportunity that you see. And I'll go back to Anna if I may to start with that. So sorry you've had least time to think, Anna, but
no worries. I get the dibs on the first go. Thanks, Mel. Look, the first thing that I'm sure there's lots of things, and the other speakers will come up with like much more considered responses, but the first thing that comes to mind in terms of impact to me is some of the work that is happening in labelling and standards, so minimum energy performance standards and labelling, a combination of with government ministries and with universities and private sector in Cambodia. There's a huge ramp up of and desire for cooling, air conditioning and other energy devices, and people are starting to buy, import and buy those types of devices in earnest. And if Cambodia and other countries in the region don't engage and think about ensuring we've got high quality products and energy efficient products, it's going to put a huge burden on the energy systems, which are also experiencing high degrees of growth. So there's something like 30% reduction in projected energy consumption that can occur as a result of implementing minimum energy performance standards for these types of equipment, which is equivalent to multiple power stations. And so if you think about the opportunity to, rather than build a 500 megawatt coal-fired power station, which is sometimes the sort of the go-to, you can not build that and save the cost of that and save the liability of having to pay the long-term like cost of that power purchase agreement, which is the way that the energy is bought. So that would be my first initial reflection, and I'm sure I'll think of many other examples as other speakers are going ahead. But yeah.
Thanks for that, and thank you for that being the opener. It's music to my ears. A favourite subject. So in that context, it's very clear the evidence is there that if governments are prepared to regulate, if they're prepared to do it well, with due consultation with industry and with consumers, then that is a really impactful way of going forward. There are many governments who are not keen on or regulating strongly, or who in the region have set minimum energy performance standards that are not really reflective of what's available and perhaps aggressive enough. What would you say the balance is between, given your kind of people-centered view of things, how much is the responsibility for governments to regulate? How much can we do with persuasion of consumers? What's the balance for you?
I think it's a really hard one, because you're asking a customer to understand energy and energy efficiency, which generally we know that energy is a very hard thing for people to engage with, and understand that if I make this purchase today, there'll be an ongoing cost, and if I spend a bit more or spend a bit less, that will change and maybe be higher or maybe be lower. And so I think the onus really is on the regulators to be aggressive or be sensible in this regard. And it's at the end of the day, it's essentially a collective good outcome, because the customer will if they discerning on price at time of purchase, will actually be worse off in the long run because their energy costs will be high. But then will also put burden on other people who may not be able to afford the air conditioner or the appliance because it will put pressure on the electricity prices. So engaging in this and sort of being thinking holistically, the appropriate regulation can support both the customer but also the broader population. Would be my reflection.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think we've seen examples where air conditioners, because they've pushed up peak energy demand, have increased the cost, and therefore the people using the energy, the air conditioners, the wealthier people, have actually been benefiting from the system. They're able to pay the bills, but they're driving the costs up to the people who don't have access to those services. So you're right. If you take a holistic view of things, there's a public good there, definitely. Thank you. Jenny, what's your favourite example? You know, what do you think if we just focused on this one thing, we could do most with? You're muted. So.
The key to the changes was the behavior changes, and we can start the behavior changes if there's no regulation. So the technical aspect. I'm taking the case in Indonesia, the technical aspect on how to conduct energy efficiency building and how to run a clean energy is not there, and it will help the process if the regulation is there. And what the key regulation was to help people to understand what are the key elements to enable people and to enable the building to be more efficient, to use more clean energy. So I think it's not only changing the behavior. Changing the behavior is the end of the process, but making sure that we are changing the market, not only the stakeholder, not only the government, but also other market player. It is important. So government institution, financial institution, and also factory, as they the one who produce all the equipment that might use energy is something that's really important. So, and intensify the willingness to include themselves in the process is also important. And incentive is something that can be regulated. So a good and strong willingness from the government to provide a good incentive to intensify people to involve in this process is important. So I'm agree with Anna. We cannot just rely on the market, but I think government and regulation help support the market to transfer from inefficient energy to more efficient energy and clean energy. So yes, it's a key process. The regulation is a key process to the market transformation.
Thank you for that. Clayton, what does the data tell us? What does your experience of mining all that data say? Can we do this through technology, or do we have to be persuasive? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Yenny's point she brought up about human behavior, I think that's really spot on. Changing people's perception of behavior, and that's what I wanted to talk about, but she covered it quite well. So I thought of something really quick now related to the data aspect of energy in buildings, which is really it's really kind of silly. People don't really know this until they run into it. Is that the actual procedure of connecting into a building system and pulling data out and actually analyzing that data is really, really difficult. And I mentioned in my introduction that we have a scalability problem. So every building is different. So when you want to analyze a building, you have to come up with an ad hoc process of actually doing that. Like, it's not like you can just create an update like you have for your mobile phone and upgrade your buildings the same way you upgrade your phones. That's not possible. So the scalability challenge really, there's a lot of things that are kind of now becoming at the forefront of research and also potentially policy, which is not just specifying the minimum efficiency of equipment or things like that. It's also specifying what type of data comes out of that equipment. So what sensors need to be installed, what is the quality of that data, and how does that data actually get reported potentially to a policy or a government agency that could help manage like the energy consumption in buildings. And for example, here in Singapore, the Building and Construction Authority has very good standards related to chilled water plants, because cooling, of course, is really one of our big energy users in commercial and residential buildings. But they also have standards related to the types of sensors that need to be installed in a chilled water plant, how often that data needs to be stored, where it's stored, and what to do with that data. And there's actual policies related to disclosing or sending that data to the BCA for analysis or for record keeping based on different policies. So that's the kind of thing that I think Singapore really does a great job of. And I think it's something to be learned from, is that it's not just about energy, it's also about, the data that can come out of the systems. So there's technology research and policy that I think can align with that, which would be really interesting.
Great, thank you. Have you got any sense of, have you got an example where you can say that by having access to this sort of data, a certain level of savings are achievable? Can you give us something? Yeah,
I think a really good example for me, and that hits close to home, is our campus here at NUS and university. I mean, anyone here who is involved with universities knows that there's always a campus that has a large collection of buildings. And NUS campus here in Singapore, for example, we have buildings from the 1960s, we have buildings in the 70s, 80s, 90s, very new buildings. And every time a building is built, there is this new system installed. There's a new building management system. If you go to the campus operations centers of a campus, you'll always see, like, it's almost like a computer museum. You'll have the computer that runs the system here in this building that was built in the 90s. There's a computer from the 2000s, and there's a sign on it that says, "Do not turn this computer off," and things like that. So there really is these kind of silos, like in these microcosms of a campus. You even have, and it's designed and built by the same owner, which is the university, right? And so even within these campuses, we have a hard time getting the data to come out of these systems and merge them, or even get these systems or buildings to talk to each other. So it's just very practical, tedious little things that you never think is a problem unless you're tasked to do it. And then you say, whoa, this is a big barrier to actually doing optimization. And there's a lot of studies, to go back to your point, there is a lot of studies that show that the building commissioning process on existing buildings saves between 15 and 20% immediately, just by making little tuning, changes up, sometimes, for example, lighting schedules are changed for an event in the evening and then not set back to usual. So just little tiny things on, in these operation systems that can be tuned and fixed can have immediate energy savings. But it's just, like I said, the example I brought up is just that there's so many systems, so much, heterogeneity of systems and communications and ages of different systems and all these things, that it just makes it tough to do from a practical standpoint. Yeah.
But it is a message that if we get those systems right, we can manage our buildings so that they are the spaces for people, they provide the services to people, but there is a lot of opportunity for technology to help that process, rather than relying on people turning the lights off, which sometimes doesn't happen, as you say. Okay, exactly. Great. Maybe Stanley, you've been working with startups. Is there one that stands out that you think, right, if we could throw every cent we could find into this is going to solve our problems?
So the thing, I've supported energy efficiency startups in all the ASEAN countries that we operate in. So there are good examples in Thailand. There's Autotech, TIE. There's good examples in Vietnam, Philippines, and also in Indonesia. What dictates like how successful these companies are going to be are a combination of the things that my fellow panelists have mentioned, right? The policy supporting the growth of these industries, right? Is policy enabling them to do their work or not? Also access to financing, right? Are they able to get equity financing for building their business? Are they able to get project financing for the projects that they plan to deploy, right? A lot of times, like when we try to pitch these types of solutions, we will need some type of ESCO financing enablement in order to really be able to scale up, as you guys mentioned, and do lots of projects, right? So it's not a lack of the entrepreneurs willing to get into this space. It's not a lack of the data collection capabilities that Clayton and the team and others in universities across the region are working on. It's about how do we enable these guys to actually be successful so they can start putting numbers up there.
But just to go back, if all of those enabling factors were in place, could you just give us one or two examples of projects that you would back, that you think can really, really make a difference in energy efficiency particularly?
Sure. We came, well, I'll give an energy efficiency example, and then also, like I mentioned our program with the Building Energy Challenge before, right? There were a couple companies working on specifically for HVAC optimization, right? So we helped them bridge with a large telco in the Philippines, and they're able to discuss projects to do energy efficiency, not only at the cell phone towers, but for their servers, right? For the data centers as well. So those are two clear examples of how a company wanted to realize that they had a lot of potential old equipment, but they needed projects to actually do to enable the savings to happen, right? So that's just one more concrete, tangible example. Another example in the concrete industry, we brought this company from Canada over with Canadian Clean Tech Accelerator last year. And so what they do is CO2 injections into concrete. So you use less material and chemically makes the concrete stronger. So those things we're trying to engage with for example, the Vietnam Association of Construction Companies, right? So these are the types of linkages we try to make and the types of projects that we try to enable.
Great examples, both of them. Thank you. Hopefully we can come back and talk another time about specific case studies. And that's something I'd like to say to everybody on the panel and everybody, listening to this conversation. If you do have case studies, even if it's a couple of paragraphs, if you've got anything that you can share on these examples, we'd love to collate those and to make use of them, to signpost people to them. Because it's in sharing this sort of experience that hopefully we can really make a difference. So if we go to Dirk next, Dirk, you cited some great examples of work that you're doing in Indonesia. You're based in Europe, of course. Can you give us a favourite example, and also make, is there anything that you think Europe does that could usefully be shared to change things in Southeast Asia? And is there anything in Southeast Asia that you think could really helpfully influence Europe?
Yes, thank you. I think there are some great examples, and of course it's possible to look at different regions in the world to learn for Asia and the development. But of course the situation is totally different when we look at Germany, for example. We have heating climate. We have also different construction activity. Our building stock is built already. So it's a different set of problems we have to face. On the other hand, I think what you can learn and what is happening also at the moment with your activity and also with other activities in the Asian region is this long-term approach. We have set up a long-term strategy how to tackle the problem. It started with energy saving ordinance very early in the 90s or as early as in the 70s. Then we had this feed-in tariff for photovoltaics and so on, introducing technologies. And this is comparable to the roadmaps which are developed now. And I think this process is very, very important to have a long vision to introduce certain technologies and so on. It must be much, much faster now. As Ian said at the very beginning, that a lot of the technologies are available and can be implemented. It's not so much a technology issue for energy efficient building in the Asian region. It's more implementation issue, a finance issue, and also to bring all the puzzle pieces together. I would not say that there is one key technology which is necessary, because we don't, it's not sufficient to just pick the low-hanging fruits and to say, oh, now we get a step forward, but we have to pick all the fruits and have to do everything what is possible. I think a very important point in this context is labeling, is to produce instruments that the normal stakeholders, like the end consumers, but also the normal designers, the engineers, and so on, are able and are enabled to apply these technologies and to prepare energy efficient solutions in the building stock, in the new buildings, but also in the existing buildings. What is always interesting for me to see is that, for example, in Vietnam, that the energy consumption figures, when you look at the databases, at the measured values, the energy consumption is very, very low. So when you start to calculate with these values and try to make the case how much energy can be saved in percentage, how much CO2 can be saved, it's not so interesting from the economic side. But you have to look at the potential, what can happen in this building when everywhere air conditioning is installed, how high would the energy consumption be then, and so on. So at the moment, people are very considerate. They are working, operating the buildings, very aware of energy consumption, at least the residential buildings. But what happens when the comfort requirements are increasing, when the demands of the people are increasing, perhaps also the economic needs are increasing? So we have to build buildings which can provide comfort and all the demands people have without much energy consumption. And I think this is our challenge. And for that, we are trying to prepare, also design support systems like labeling systems, but also data sets for simulation studies and so on, so that we can make this assessment before the buildings are built and the problem is created. Thank you.
Thanks, Dirk. And then Bintang, you have you and your team at ACE have a huge amount of experience across ASEAN on energy efficiency. Is there an example that you can think of in the region, a very specific example where you've thought, well, if all the countries did that well as somebody is doing, then we'd make a real difference and we could make a difference quickly. Can you think of something that you think is really exemplary?
Okay. Besides that, I just pick up new mic, so please let me know if my voice is still unclear. Is it now? Can you hear my voice now clearly? Okay. So maybe just the nearest to me is about the harmonization of the ASEAN standard. As we know that the air conditioner have the cooling seasonal performance factor, that is the seasonal EER. And we are now implementing this seasonal EER to update the old EER, because the old EER did not handle the inverter type of air conditioner well. However, it's kind of like easy to do, because it makes an update to the policy that is inline, that is from EER to the CSPF or the seasonal ER. However, this common challenge because each country have their own system and this policy roadmap priority. So maybe this is not the priority, the same priority in each country, and also every country already have their own set of roadmap set aside from their own planning. This is the challenge that is due from the regional policy. We have to have a single policy that can be used in these 10 ASEAN member states. So by integrating all of the available policy that is from the most advanced technology to the least advanced technology, we have to pick a good suggestion, good roadmap, policy roadmap to encourage all of the ASEAN member states to have at least the same amount of standard. But we also want to catch up with the advanced technology to have the same amount of effort in the region. So maybe in the air conditioner type that yes, we can look at the number and say, oh, we can increase this maps in the region if we saw the number, if we saw the market availability. However, it's because of the region, because if we go more detail into the country, maybe it will impact their local manufacturer, and also the consumer itself mostly did not specify the type of the air conditioner. Maybe usually the commercial side, maybe they can buy the higher efficient appliances, but however the lower residential has maybe did not prefer to use the higher efficient, but they are choosing the cheaper option for the appliances. This is another issue that is because of the multiple input from the each IMS has different characteristic that is become a quite challenging in the regional roadmap. And so again, in the air conditioner, if we just say just like you say, if we can just change it into something that we want, maybe it will impact it in the least developed technology side that is will have a difficult side for them to catch up with our suggestions.
Thank you, Bintang. Thanks. Yeah, very, very good points about the different stages of development, and there are issues for. This goes back to, Anna started us off on this right at the beginning, talking about MEPS and trying to take into account the conditions for manufacturers and for consumers in a range of different countries. Some make things, some don't. Some are technology takers, some are technology providers. Some have very price sensitive markets. Some have more sophisticated consumers who really want to buy more advanced products. Trying to make a system work across those sorts of conditions is, of course, really tough, but it's an essential challenge. And thanks to the great work that Ace and others are doing, we're getting there. It'll take some time. We're almost out of time, so I'm going to thank everybody for their comments. But I'd like to go back to Clayton once, because something that underpins all of this. Our constituency is governments. We're really talking to policymakers most of the time. We know we have to involve consumers, we have to involve manufacturers, but really that's our focus. You talked about the issues with data and compatibility of systems. If you had one piece of advice for governments to help us kind of solve this problem that we can build into these roadmaps, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me think about this a little bit. So I think going back to what I was suggesting about, let me go back to the example of the chilled water plant. And I think chilled water plants are, it's very common across all of Southeast Asia. Air conditioning and cooling is a really important topic when it comes to energy and buildings, obviously. And so I think that, you know, looking at the problem of cooling plants and their efficiency is a matter of obviously getting, you know, having high standards about the individual pieces of equipment in a plant. So the chiller and the pumps and all these things, and that's kind of the main focus of a lot of energy related codes is your individual components need to have certain levels of efficiency. And then there's the level of efficiency, sometimes they specify at the system level. So like what they do here in Singapore, I think is a really good model for other governments and other agencies that deal with this to look at, which is setting kind of a standard for that efficiency as a system, but also specifying exactly how that efficiency can be evaluated in a really easy, scalable way, so that every new system that's installed or every existing system that's retrofitted, anybody can come in and identify the system level efficiency very quickly, including the government agencies who might be in charge of that type of thing, which is, for example, like I said, here in Singapore, it's the Building Construction Authority. And so they've been doing this now for about almost a decade, I think, where they've been specifying not just standards of chilled water plants, but also the sensors, the accuracy of the sensors that need to be installed, the quality of sensors, and the data acquisition system itself. And then, you know, exactly how each building owner can actually export that data and submit it as a data set that the government agency can then look at and determine whether the system is working well or not. And so this is something that I think it's overlooked. I'm from the US originally. I mean, in the US, there's nothing like this. There really is no government oversight of actual evaluation of data at that level. And here in Singapore, it works really well. And Singapore has probably some of the most efficient chilled water plants you can find because of this whole value chain from just, you know, equipment all the way to the evaluation of performance. And it took a long time. It took about a decade, I think, to get that to where it is here in Singapore, but I think it's a great model for others to look at as a practical way of implementing that. Yeah. And then of course, building on what I said before about data skills. So of course, if you're going to specify that everyone starts generating all these massive data sets and submitting them to an agency, you have to have somebody at the other end who's able to actually process those data using something besides a spreadsheet, right? Or just Excel. You have to be able to kind of be able to handle larger volumes of data, which is where the skills come in.
Great, thank you, Clayton. Yep. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
And great to have a really brilliant example from the region to share with others. So what we're going to do now is go into our breakout sessions so that the rest of our participants can discuss what they've heard and bring up examples, ask questions, and we'll have some Mentee polls as we did yesterday. Just a reminder for people going into the breakout groups, if you have started doing the homework and if there is an example you would like to talk about, please signal that in the chat so that your facilitator can call on you. And with that, we'll depart the plenary. We'll be back 10 minutes before the end of time just for a very brief wrap up. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. Brilliant, brilliant examples.
Hello, everybody. We will make our way into this breakout session, which I'll be happy to lead the discussion with yourselves. And it's nice to see both Mel and Clayton here. So we can pick up on some of the things that you'd said, Clayton, about.
I'm supposed to be here though, because I'm supposed to be in my own room, and I hope it's me that's in the wrong place. No, it's Ian that's in the wrong place.
Ian is in the wrong place.
Oh, he got kicked out, it looks like.
Yeah, absolutely not. He's got a group waiting to talk to him. We'll just wait a couple of minutes as people come in. thanks everybody for joining this breakout session. As we said before, the idea is to see if people have things that they'd like to pick up on that came out of the conversations earlier. Please do raise your hand if you would like to say something, and put in the chat if you want to give an example to share that's relevant to the topic we've been talking about. Whilst people are joining, we'll just go to the first of our Mentee polls just so that we can give people a little bit of time to think about their questions. And this one is going to be on where we think the biggest gains lie in operations and systems improvements. Thanks, Mattia. So if people could log into Mentee again, at the top of this slide, you can see the code. It's 32050683, and let us know where they think the biggest opportunities lie. That would be great. So while we're waiting for people to fill that Mentee poll in, we have somebody from India who would like to share an example with us. I can't see your name in the chat. So if the person from India who's asked to be able to share an example would like to turn their camera on and to just explain what they'd like to introduce to us, that would be great. But please keep it brief because we want to give as many people as possible the chance to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Am I audible and visible?
You are, yes, thank you very much.
Okay, though I am currently living and based in Singapore, I am originally from India, where I've spent most of my career. And I happen to be part of the organization which created the Green Buildings movement in India. It started in the year 2003, and the world's second platinum rated building was the office of that center of the department, which started this movement in India from a building which was 20,000 square feet built area. It's got all kinds of, good examples and practices. I will be sharing those in part of the document, which I will be submitting as part of the homework. But then from then till now, it has reached a total of almost 7 billion square feet of built area across India in 7,000 plus buildings. And the target is to double that in the next 5 years. So what I'm trying to say is industry took the lead. This is an industry body set up by industry for industry. It works closely with the government. It was able to demonstrate to the government how beneficial these buildings are. So the price differential has come down to it's almost the same as a conventional building. And there are many government policies and incentives which are linked with such buildings. For example, there are the national level guidelines and there are the provincial level guidelines. So for example, one state can give a rebate, or it can give an extra floor area built for that same thing if that building is gold or higher standard. And there are many more examples. I don't want to take the time of the group now, but it will be all part of the link that I wanted to share. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. And a really important example that is really relevant to the region, because India is such a massive country with all sorts of climate zones and all sorts of different conditions. And you can apply the sort of state, provincial type of approach that you have in India with building codes, with other building requirements, as you can, and you can apply that to a region as well as a country, of course, because there are similar complications, but also benefits in sharing. So great example. Mattia, could you show us the results of this first Mentee poll, please? So In general, people think office buildings are where the biggest improvements lie. This always changes when people see other people's answers. You can start to see the jostling going on here. And industrial facilities, of course, you'd expect to be high up there. One thing that I think is important to note is that while government buildings are only third in this tally, we do see that it's a great place for countries to start. They can, you know, if they start to show examples of requirements in government buildings, then that can help finally influence the general population of buildings. And as an example, Clayton was talking earlier about data requirements. And, you know, one thing that you could conceive is that government buildings are required to report data in a certain way because the government has the power to do that of their own building stock. They also have the benefits of the improvements in energy efficiency and reduced bills that they can gain, but they can use that as a way of understanding how different types of building work. You know, if they don't have that basic data set, which is often the case in many countries, it can be a really great starting point. So whilst it's third on the list, I would say it's it may be not where the biggest gain lies, but it's one of the biggest influences of what can happen in the future. So let's go on to the. Is there anybody else who wants to make a comment at the moment or share anything? If not, we'll go on to the next Mentee. So here, there's a spelling mistake, of course, in this slide. It should say, what are some of the biggest barriers to the deployment of high efficiency operations and systems in your city? And this is a free-for-all. So just anything that occurs to you, please just note it down, and we'll see if we start to get any themes coming through. Whilst we're doing this, just to say on that last point, before I came to the IEA, I used to work in the Australian government, and one of the things that I thought was really neat there with buildings was the fact that there was the National Buildings Energy Rating System, NABERS, which provided a measurement mechanism, but then that underpinned the star rating that was applied to buildings, which in turn underpinned the building declaration, what they call the commercial building disclosure, so that whenever a commercial building is sold or let, the energy performance of that building has to be displayed if it's over a certain size. And that in itself, it links the measurement technique to a market mechanism. It's a fantastic way of collecting data on buildings so that you can start to understand their performance better. And there's great evidence to show how impactful it's been on the energy performance of commercial buildings. So you've got this win-win situation from a voluntary program, but in having it based on a well-founded, a measurement system that's been developed over many years, you also develop a body of expertise that understands that system. You have a business basically of auditors who can apply that system. So by linking all of these things, you have a great connection which really drives the market. And the government also uses that for their own tenancies of buildings. So they will only occupy buildings of certain ratings. So they're all connected. In many countries, they have all of these components, but they're not connected in the same way. So I'd say that was a really good example. And to Clayton's point, the public buildings actually have to report their performance to a centralized department within government. So that data is being collected. So using government to pioneer these sorts of techniques is a good opportunity. Okay, so we're seeing, as expected, cost being the biggest barrier to deployment of high efficient systems and operations. We've got cost and upfront cost here, so we've combined them. Cost gets even more of a part of this pie. Is there anybody on the group who would like to comment on what they're seeing here? Make any observations? No? So one thing I would say is that this is perhaps showing that we're just not doing our job well enough, because these high efficiency operations and systems will be cost savers, not cost generators, and basically that means that we're not being convincing enough, or we're not providing enough evidence to show that that's the case, because we don't do these things just for the fun of it. The reason for having these systems in place is to reduce costs and to enable the consumers and the inhabitants of cities to have a better life at the same time. So it's a win-win situation, and we're clearly not getting that across well enough. So let's go to our next slide, please. So I've suggested some of the things that governments can do. We talked about a view of those in the with the plenary session just now. What do people on the call think are some of the biggest barriers that can be overcome by policymakers? What can policymakers do to change this? So cost was what was the biggest barrier. What do you think policymakers can do to overcome this? Sorry if that's not clear enough. So how does government take a lead to reduce costs? So Clayton, because you're the only person I can see at the moment, I'm going to pick on you whilst people are thinking about this. What's your thought on the answers to this question?
Yeah, I think cost is a tricky subject. Trying to think of, well, I mean one of the biggest ways, especially so like new technology and like the data stuff that I was talking about, cost is always a function of the scale of the market. So like as more and more demand and more players in the market, the cost usually goes down. When it's a brand new thing, it's usually quite high. So when it comes to these new technologies, I think the government taking the first step and sort of spending a bit of extra money to implement a new technology on their own buildings or on university buildings, or giving grants just so that technology can kind of gain a little bit of a foothold in the market. And then other players in the market might start, basically the price gets lower and lower as more and more people enter the market or more demand is there. So being a first mover and taking a risk as a government on their own buildings, I think is a really cool policy that could help with cost, for at least for new technologies. That's kind of one of my thoughts.
Yeah, very good point, very important point. One thing that I'm interested that subsidies is looking so big here, and I know that they're popular in the region. So we do see that governments end up in traps with subsidies in many parts of the world. So while they are an incredibly important public policy tool, they obviously have to be applied extremely carefully to make sure that they are, they do the job that they're intended to. We see in many parts of the world that it's the wealthy that benefit from subsidies, even if that wasn't the intention. So just a word of caution there. They look like a bit of a silver bullet to some, but they are very difficult to design well. And sometimes, if you take I don't know, take air conditioners or efficient air conditioners, sometimes it might be cheaper for the system as a whole, to grant more efficient equipment to the most vulnerable in society, say, than to have wide-ranging subsidies that are across the market. So they need to be considered very carefully. Education, of course, really important here. I'm intrigued that regulation's not appearing as strongly here, because it did very much in the previous conversation. If you have, we find in many places, if you have very clear regulations that help aggregate markets for particularly efficient products and systems, then that simplifies markets, reduces the cost. So there's a big driver that's possible there. Okay, we'll leave that one. Does anybody else want to make any comments? Have we got anybody who's interested in contributing to the conversation? If not, we'll go to our next question. Have you observed uptake trends of digital devices among private consumers in recent years in your country city? If so, which devices? This is a subject that we're really, really interested in. We're very keen to expand the concept of energy efficiency, and we have lots of people asking us what the next kind of generation of energy efficiency policy looks like. And of course, digitalization is a massively important part of that, being that of our building management systems, as we talked about before, but also impacting on individual consumers. So we're very interested to see here where you've observed change already, rather than where you think the potential is. This is where you've actually seen good examples. Very pleased to see that there's nobody saying they haven't observed any trends. So that's very encouraging to us. Good to see the smart appliances being strong in there. Would anybody want to comment on smart energy meters and how they've seen particularly good examples of these? Any thoughts from anybody? Clayton, would you like to chip in?
Sure. Yeah, I do have a situation I was going to try to share.
I thought you were reaching for your mute buttons.
That's right. I think smart meters is something, and I worked on some data related to smart meters in my PhD. And the example I have is from the U.S. About, I think, almost 10 years ago. There was this big implementation of smart meters across various states. California, I think California, Texas, Vermont are examples. And I had a chance to work with an entity in Vermont called the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation. And they basically have this really unique situation where they, for the whole state of Vermont, they're able to run these energy savings programs for commercial and residential buildings. And it's kind of like they call it an efficiency utility. So the ratepayers of Vermont would pay a small charge, which would go into this pot of money that VEIC could basically earn money from this fund based on the amount of energy they save through their programs. And they were using smart meters in really clever ways to try to figure out what are the best candidates for different types of energy saving programs. And to residential buildings, it was kind of, they had a very strong program. And I was helping with the commercial buildings. So kind of using smart meters, if you have 30,000 buildings of smart meters, which are the buildings that you try to target for refrigeration system retrofits, right? Something, so using this like really rich data to try to figure out where are the low-hanging fruit for energy savings interventions is what they called them. And that model is really cool. I haven't seen it replicated in many places. I think it's kind of a challenge, but I thought that was a cool example.
It's a very good example. Thank you. Yeah. So one of the conflicts here is that you've seen smart meter rollout programs around the world, and in many cases, it's just the meter that's accessible to the utility. It's because many of the benefits are to the public utilities, the energy providers, and therefore they don't actually go the extra step to do the consumer end and provide the in-home displays. And then again, I've seen examples where people have an in-home display and it's a bit of a toy and they play with it to start with, and then they put it in a drawer because the battery ran out or something. So smart meters, hugely powerful tool. But really, again, programs have to be designed very carefully to make sure all parts of society gain from them. then they're not just a mechanism for the utilities to save money, which of course is an important thing, but there's got to be the consumer end of that's got to be thought about as well. Okay, so if we have nobody else who wants to contribute, then we'll go to our next question. So, how should policymakers prioritise different factors on green building policy? So, order of priorities. Whilst people are answering this question, one of the things I'd perhaps like to point to is something that Ian used in his presentation yesterday. We've been doing a lot of work here on counting the jobs associated with clean energy transitions. And we have some interesting data that was published earlier this year. But one of the things I always like to point out is that in terms of investment, you know, job created per dollar of investment, buildings comes out highest on the list of across the clean energy transitions. That's both new buildings and retrofit of existing buildings. And one of the really good things about the jobs that are created through through buildings in particular, and unlike those in other parts, they're very long-term jobs and they're local jobs. So one of the things that we've been doing quite a lot on is, you know, trying to work with governments on how they use their plans for economic recovery post the COVID pandemic, how they can focus money potentially on building energy efficiency, because not only does it make people's lives better, which is really, really necessary at the moment, of course, more so than ever, it also actually has this long-term benefit of creating these good quality jobs. So what do others think? So I haven't done a very good sales job on job creation because it's still only 5th on the list at the moment, but I'm intrigued to see that energy and climate are so high. I think that's probably because we've got a group of professionals talking about this. And I do think that if we had the general public kind of answering a question like this, we might have a somewhat different balance here. Would anybody like to comment on these before we move on? Would whoever said another factor, would anybody like to tell me what the other factor is that we've missed on the list, because that would be useful to us? You can just unmute yourself if you'd like to let us know. No? Okay, we'll move on to our next slide then, please. So who do you believe has the most impact on scaling up net zero buildings in the region? Is it government, national, local, the private sector, consumers, development organisations, NGOs? So very interested to see that there isn't a perceived role for local government here. As the world urbanises and our cities become the centre of the increase in energy demand, we see that, of course, the decisions being made by local government, particularly the planning decisions, for example, are having a huge impact on carbon emissions, energy consumption. So city governments, in our view, do have a huge role to play in implementation in particular. And one of the things that interests us, and we're working more on, and we're trying to capture in the roadmap process, is the role that national governments and city governments can play together. What are the interactions? What are the kind of roles and responsibilities that each can take to support each other? I mean, our constituency as the International Energy Agency is primarily national governments, but what can the national governments do to to support, to enable, to help the implementation happen at pace and scale locally. That's one of the things that we're really looking at. So again, sorry, Clayton, for this, but you live in a city-state. You come from a country that's the other way round, but has very strong state government, but with a very strong federal government as well. What's your view on the relationship between national and local government in particular, and the roles they can play?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I've had, before I came to, I've been in Singapore now for almost 12 years. And before that, I worked as an engineer in the US. And there really is a vast difference in the way that energy efficiency and energy sort of policy works in Singapore as compared to where I was in the States. And I found here that it's very, it's really, really efficient, and it's really, I mean, Singapore is a city-state, as you said, so we don't have different levels of government. We just have one. It's a city government and a national government at the same time. So the efficiency that brings is really amazing, and Singapore does a great job of kind of bringing in experts from around the world to kind of give advice, and so the policy is developed in a really efficient way. It would be great if that kind of model could just be scaled across other places, but it just can't, because of course there's not hardly any other countries that are in the same situation in terms of having such a small land area. So the thing that I've seen from the States is cities in the US. So you have these city energy disclosure programs. So cities are kind of taking the lead in the US, which is kind of synonymous to what's happens here in Singapore, because it's also a city and a country at the same time. And so it's a lot more fragmented, but at the same time, the cities in the US that have these energy policies are able to customize them for that particular context, and they can focus really on their immediate context of their city, which is great. So it's kind of, it's just very interesting to see the differences. I think both types have their pluses and minuses. But yeah, they're different, and what's done here in Singapore, I would say, is in the leading edge of policy with related to energy in as compared to a lot of places around the world, because we have this efficiency of policy making. So
interesting. I just another Australian example. So this is an old program. Some years ago, they had this program which was called Solar Cities, which was really, solar was a bit of a misnomer because it was actually mainly energy efficiency. But this was a way for the national government to promote clean energy in the city context, and cities were able to bid to be part of this project and to get funding from the project. And they what was really interesting is they put together consortia with the city governments, often with a local energy company, maybe some consultants, maybe somebody specialized in a particular technology, but they were free to put together whatever consortium they chose to bid to be awarded grant money, basically. But what was then good, that meant that each solar city was completely different, which was fine because it was bottom up, it was roots up. But then you got the opportunity to see what worked. They were like incubators. You could see what worked because there were very strong measurement and reporting requirements as a quid pro quo for the grant money. Like you say, you said other things earlier, Clayton, you design these things as a data gathering exercise as well as a promotional exercise. Another thing that's really important, of course, about working in cities is that you get closer to people there. So municipal services in cities, they're the things that touch people's lives most closely. Do the streetlights work? Do they like the parts of the place that make people feel safe? Does the public transport system actually get people where they need to be for their work and for their leisure? Does it create ghettos? Does it actually help people across all of their lives? Can you get to school as well as to work? All of those things are things that local government have a huge impact on, but national government can also help with too. So very interesting there. So let's go to our last question then, please. So we're interested to know what some of your key takeaways from the last 2 days have been here. So just anything you like, you can write anything you like on this word cloud, and they'll help us in our consideration of future events. They'll help us with the roadmaps. If we come up with some key themes that we feel that perhaps we haven't sufficiently prioritized. So anything you'd like to say, feel free to enter here. Of course, completely anonymous, so we don't know who's saying what. So don't worry about what you say here. Nothing. No takeaways. So what are your takeaways then, Clayton?
That first box is the one I just posted. So I think my takeaway is really seeing the perceptions from people around the region and the perception of which policies are important, which is something that I've never been exposed to, is kind of like a group of people and what they think is the most useful, in a sense.
Great.
I think that's really interesting.
And that's why we bring these sorts of groups together, so that we can get this diversity of opinion, and reach more people, of course, in the region. A few more coming in now, and one of the things we find important is, of course, to demonstrate experience here in Southeast Asia, but also bring people together who've got views and experience from other parts of the world that might help. Something that we have a best practice appearing here. One of the things that the IEA does a lot of is convene people to share experience, and it's something that people often really appreciate. It's not something that you can look up in a book. You really do need a human interaction in order to be able to really see whether or not somebody else's experience can perhaps be adapted to your circumstances. So it's interesting to see these sorts of views coming through. I like there's not much difference between countries. It's important to cooperate. I'm a big believer of this. I feel that a lot of people say my circumstances are different, therefore what you're saying doesn't relate to me, because it's kind of easy to say that. And sometimes if we just dig a lower level, then we can start to find examples where we can usefully share. Again, going to something like building codes, which people often say, well, I can't do what they did because my climate's different. Well, there's only a certain number of climates around the world. They're well defined. You can have building codes that have climatic conditions in the same way as you can have air conditioner standards that have climatic conditions. And then everybody who has that type of climate, can actually adopt that code or that standard. That test method. So it's not something that everybody has to invent from the ground up. There's still that opportunity to share. I think that's something that we're seeing, through these conversations on the roadmaps. It's been easy to have conversations globally about globally traded products, light bulbs, television sets, air conditioners, things that are sold in their millions worldwide, where the service that they provide is pretty much the same wherever they're used. So that's been something that's been really much easier. With buildings, they're designed for their local conditions, with their local materials, with local traditions as well as conditions. They've been much harder to have these sorts of global conversations about, but that's changing, and we're seeing that through this roadmap process. Anyway, we're going to end there and go back to our plenary just for a quick wrap up. I'd just like to thank everybody for doing the polls. I'd like to thank Clayton very much for his support in this conversation yet again, and we'll see you in a moment back in the main room. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. We'll be there. Thank you. Welcome back to our plenary session. I hope you had interesting discussions in your breakout groups. We're just going to take a few minutes to close now, and I'm going to hand over to Ian to start with to make some closing reflections from his perspective. Ian.
Thanks, Mel. And thank you everybody for joining today. I think that certainly in our session, we had a really interesting conversation reflecting on some of the aspects around, that integration of building design and the systems. So, being able to ensure that naturally ventilated buildings are best adopting systems that can continue to enable the natural ventilation side of things. We talked a lot about the ways in which technology is being adopted and how policymakers can think through the ways of awarding those, showcasing and promoting, best practice and those individuals within that system to highlight and recognize their work. So being able to showcase and share around award and recognition. And then we also reflected on some of the digital angle around the I use the words, making blind buildings see and dumb buildings speak, being able to take an analog building and begin to make use of those digital opportunities, but making sure that they have a core objective to improve that performance outcome and to not necessarily overcomplicate, but to help to simplify to achieve that performance. So perhaps I might stop there. But also just to highlight, for those who have examples and perhaps those were discussed in different breakout sessions, we think that this is some of the key ways for you to bring forward those ideas or those technologies, policies that inspire you, that continue to drive your interest in this topic area forward. And we'd really encourage you to share those with us. And if there's an opportunity to showcase that within the Asean Roadmap, we would be really keen to know of your examples. So also to of course, refer to the coursework and the homework as a part of the completion. We would very much like for within the next 2 days to complete that and to send that back to the email address in the form. And that way we can ensure that we're capturing all of your great ideas and knowledge sharing. So thank you very much, Mel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ian. And with that, I'd like to hand over to our good friend and colleague, Ms. Latha Ganesh, who's the Senior Assistant Director of External Relations Department at the Energy Markets Authority of Singapore, to make the formal closing remarks. Latha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mel. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot. Good afternoon, good morning, friends, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues from the International Energy Agency. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate all the participants, quite a large number of participants this round, for successfully completing this Singapore-IEA regional training program on low carbon buildings. We are really heartened to see that the challenges brought about by COVID-19 has not really prevented us from organizing this training program. I encourage you to share your feedback through this coursework and so that we can better refine the program and also reach out to more stakeholders in future courses. I'm also delighted that the discussions I was listening into some of the breakout sessions, they were very active, and through this coursework, we've also learned that our participants have shared examples of low carbon policies and technologies, incentives, some of the barriers to energy efficient buildings, how these can be implemented in their countries. And I hope that the training modules have been useful to them and in fostering and also understanding better some of the different issues, some of the different regulatory policies, technologies that can be implemented in tandem with realizing energy efficient buildings, the goals in achieving your energy efficient buildings. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the IEA and EMA teams who have worked very hard on working closely together for organizing this training program. We're really grateful for their support and for reaching out to our guest speakers and panelists. I would like to hope, I would really like to hope that the participants keep in touch, form this network of IEA training alumni. And right now we have something like 800 participants or alumni from more than 30 countries. Under this Singapore IEA Training Hub, Regional Training Hub initiative. And we hope to expand it further in the years ahead. Lastly, let me share that the Singapore International Energy Week will be held this year in October as a hybrid virtual model, physical and virtual, from 25th to 29th October. And at SU, we will be having EMA and IEA will be collaborating once again, to organize the Singapore IEA Forum. And with this, I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome all the participants who join us at this year's SU and the Singapore IEA Forum. Thank you. Thanks, Natalie. Back to you.
Many thanks, Latha. And it just remains for me to say thank you again to the Singapore team, as well as the team here at the IEA, and to all our speakers and presenters, and to all our participants as well for their engagement. Rest assured that examples you give us, we will use, we will publish, we will share with others. So please, become an active part of our group here and our group of alumni, as Latha said. So thank you all and have a great day.